The heat was an enemy at Fort Claiborne, a small, dusty National Guard facility tucked deep in the Texas brush country. It wasn't a vital base, just a place for logistical overflow and temporary duty. Staff Sergeant Cora Ramirez knew the heat, and she knew the feeling of being surplus. Her office, designated 22B, was a windowless converted storage room next to the main vehicle maintenance hangar. The official title on her deployment orders was Admin and Logistics Coordinator, a polite military term for sidelined. Cora wasn't meant for paperwork. She was a soldier who smelled like jet fuel and oil, not toner cartridges. She was one of the military's best rotary wing mechanics. A true ace in the air and on the ground, holding both a rare pilot certification for advanced lift vehicles and an equally rare master mechanic designation. But her official record carried a stain, a single career-damaging entry of negligence from a mission 2 years ago that she privately knew was a lie. A lie she swallowed to protect the reputation of her whole former unit and, foolishly, the career of the man who had ordered the cover-up. She had accepted the demotion and the transfer, hoping to wait it out, but the injustice felt heavier every day. It was 200 hours. The air conditioning unit in 22B had died hours ago, and the humidity was stifling. Cora had been struggling with a frustrating ledger of spare parts, the kind of work that demanded attention but offered no reward. Exhausted, she had kicked her boots off and leaned back in her broken swivel chair, closing her eyes for just a moment. The heat, the drone of the distant generator, and the sheer mental drain of pointless work pulled her under. Then, the world shattered. It wasn't an alarm, but a sound far worse. The ripping, metallic shriek of a heavy aircraft executing an uncontrolled rough vertical landing. The whole concrete floor of the hangar office vibrated, throwing the supply cabinet door open with a crash. Cora bolted upright, instantly awake, grabbing her uniform shirt draped over her desk. She heard shouting, harsh and precise, followed by the distinctive thud of heavy-duty boots on the hangar floor. Peeking out from 22B's doorway, she saw it, a sleek, black, beautiful monster of a helicopter, a V-19 Wasp stealth transport. It was a prototype, a whisper of a machine rarely seen outside of special operations testing. It was clearly damaged. Its left vertical thruster was angled unnaturally, spewing steam and oil onto the hangar floor. A small, tight unit of soldiers, clearly SEALs, were swarming the landing zone, securing the perimeter with lethal efficiency. Leading them was a man whose presence filled the hangar. Captain Marcus Thorne, lean, hawk-eyed, and radiating an energy that was half panic, half raw command. He was on a satellite phone, his voice a low, furious rumble. "No, I can't wait for the relief bird. It'll be 3 hours at the earliest, and we need to move this asset now," Thorne snapped. Gesturing angrily at the disabled V-19, he disconnected abruptly, swearing under his breath. He looked around the empty, dusty National Guard hangar with utter contempt. He saw no one, no expertise, only failure. That's when his eyes landed on Cora, standing by the door of 22B, still tucking her shirt in. Thorne didn't see a staff sergeant or a mechanic. He saw a young woman, sweat-slicked, hair mussed, looking like she'd just woken up on the job. "You." Thorne's voice was ice. "Did you just wake up? This is a national security asset, not a hotel." Cora didn't flinch. "Staff Sergeant Ramirez, Captain. Admin. And yes, sir, I was resting while waiting on a parts manifest." He dismissed her with a wave. "Get out of the way. Lieutenant Jackson!" He turned to a younger officer. "What's the diagnostic? Can we get this thing to hover for 10 minutes? Jackson looked grim. "Sir, the starboard thrust vectoring control actuator is totally fried. It's a custom part, Captain. We can't bypass the safety interlocks on the vertical lift, and the manual is useless. Without that actuator, this bird is grounded. We have maybe 20 minutes before the asset's security window closes." Thorne ran a hand over his face, his exasperation boiling over into fury. He looked back at the crippled V-19, then back at the useless officers around him, and finally, his gaze settled back on Cora. He didn't look at her as a solution, but as the only available human to vent his frustration on. He pointed at the V-19 with a look of pure, agonizing desperation. His question cut through the tense silence of the hangar. ringing with hopelessness and a desperate plea to the empty room. Who can fly this bird? The question was rhetorical, but Cora took one step out of the doorway of 22B, her boots hitting the concrete. The smell of oil and fuel was a familiar perfume. She was no longer tired. The injustice of her current role was a cold knot in her stomach, but the sight of a broken machine was a call to duty she couldn't ignore. "Sir," she said, her voice clear and level, "flying it is one thing. Getting it off the ground with that specific failure is another." Thorne stared at her, his jaw tightening. He didn't even register her rank. The insult was clear in his eyes. "Who are you to interrupt?" His primary concern was a national security emergency. "Ramirez," he said, biting off the name as if it were distasteful. "I asked who can fly it, not who can read the service manual. Go back to your ledger." Cora didn't move. She just looked at the V-19, then back at the captain. The challenge was set, the disrespect delivered. The insult landed hard, but Cora was used to ignoring the noise. She took another step toward the captain, not shrinking under his glare. The pressure wasn't on her. It was on him and the asset he needed to move. "With respect, Captain," Cora said, planting her feet. "The starboard vectoring control isn't just a part. It's a high-frequency sensor and actuator assembly that feeds directly into the master flight computer. If you try to bypass it, the computer will ground the aircraft permanently for catastrophic system failure. You need to trick the computer into thinking the actuator is working, not just force the thruster." Jackson, the young lieutenant, stepped forward, frowning. "That's not in the Level 3 manual, Staff Sergeant. You can't trick the system. I wrote the Level 3 addendum for this specific assembly on the second prototype during field trials in Nevada," Cora replied, her tone even. "It's a common failure mode when the high-frequency magnetics short out. You can't fix it, but you can bridge the feedback loop with a simple copper shunt to stabilize the internal resistance readings. That will clear the interlock long enough for a controlled vertical ascent, provided the flight computer is set to manual override, experimental lift profile alpha." Thorne looked from Cora to Jackson, his expression unreadable. Jackson shrugged, bewildered. "Sir, I've never heard of experimental lift profile alpha." "It was classified testing, Lieutenant," Cora supplied calmly. "It's a low-power lift profile that lets the pilot use the main rotors to compensate for the vertical thrusters imbalance, but only if the flight computer gets the right feedback signal." Thorne finally lowered his guard just a fraction. This wasn't admin talk. This was deep, specialized knowledge. He still looked doubtful, seeing her administrative rank and her reputation, but the ticking clock of his mission was louder than his prejudice. "How long?" he asked. 10 minutes to set the shunt," Cora said. 20 minutes to reboot the flight computer, adjust the manual trim calibration, and warm up the main rotors in the specific sequence required by Profile Alpha. 30 minutes total. If your mechanic tries to swap the part, it'll be 6 hours. Thorne made a split-second decision. "Jackson, you and Sergeant Miller assist her. If she touches one wrong wire, you stop her immediately." He looked at Cora, his eyes hard. "You fail, Staff Sergeant, and you are relieved of duty permanently. Understand?" "Understood, Captain," Cora replied, a small flicker of triumph in her heart. She hadn't asked for credit or forgiveness. She had demanded the right to use her skill. She moved, shedding the administrative persona entirely. She asked Jackson for a multimeter and a specific length of high-grade copper wire. She didn't bother to ask for specialized tools. She knew they wouldn't have them. She retrieved a simple utility knife and a pair of pliers from a hidden pouch in her combat belt. The lieutenant and Sergeant Miller watched, dumbfounded, as Cora calmly sliced open the protective casing of the failing thruster assembly. The work was precise, the kind of delicate mechanical surgery that required not just knowledge but feel. She didn't hesitate, diving into the guts of the sophisticated machine like it was an old truck engine. Jackson tried to interrupt once, suggesting a different diagnostic point. "That's the power input line." "Lieutenant," Cora corrected him without looking up. "The failure is the feedback sensor. 2 different systems. Hold the flashlight steady, please." Jackson complied, his skeptical frown slowly morphing into confusion, then grudging respect. He watched as she soldered a small, intricate copper loop, bypassing the damaged magnetics and connecting it to the secondary logic board. It was a beautiful, efficient, and deeply intelligent hack. 10 minutes later, exactly as she promised, Cora sealed the panel. She wiped the oil from her hands with a rag. "Flight computer is clear of the interlock, Captain," she announced, stepping back from the V-19. "The system now reports nominal resistance. But remember, the thrust itself is unstable. Only profile alpha, and only by a highly experienced pilot who can feel the imbalance." The plane was ready to fly, but no pilot could safely take off under those conditions. Thorne had fixed the mechanical problem only to reveal an even greater human one. He needed a pilot with the mechanical knowledge to understand exactly how the thruster would fail during flight, the person who just fixed it. Thorne realized he had only one choice. He looked at Cora, finally seeing the staff sergeant, not the supply clerk. "Ramirez," he said, the sound of her rank now holding a different weight. "You just saved my mission. Now who do you suggest can fly it?" Cora looked him straight in the eye, her resolve unbreakable. "I just told you, Captain. I have the certification. I know exactly how this bird is going to fail in the air. I'll fly it." Captain Thorne hesitated, his mind racing through protocols and regulations. He was a SEAL commander, accustomed to taking calculated risks, but putting a sidelined admin clerk in the cockpit of a classified prototype with a temporary fix was a massive gamble. Yet his mission was everything. The clock had almost run out. "Fine," Thorne said, his voice clipped. "You're flying. Lieutenant Jackson, you're the co-pilot. You obey her commands in the air. If she says abort, we abort. No unauthorized communication." Cora nodded, a surge of pure, focused energy replacing her exhaustion. This was where she belonged. This was her truth. She climbed into the cockpit of the V-19, the familiar scent of the flight deck, leather, and electronics, a welcome sensation. Her hands moved over the controls, checking systems, her touch gentle and certain. Jackson, still dubious but obedient, sat beside her. "Start-up sequence, Lieutenant," Cora ordered, her voice transforming from the calm staff sergeant to the focused pilot. "Ace, execute the triple check on the main rotor engagement. We're in alpha profile, so the pitch has to be precise before lift." She expertly punched in the required codes, bypassing the standard lift parameters. The V-19's twin main rotors began to spin up, a deep, powerful thrum vibrating through the hull. She ignored the red warning indicator blinking on the thrust vectoring gauge, trusting her copper shunt. The tension in the hangar was unbearable. Thorne stood outside, watching every shudder of the expensive aircraft, ready to give the order to cut power. Cora gave a slow, deliberate thumbs up. "Prepare for lift." "Vertical ascent. Manual trim compensation initiated." She fed power to the thrusters, and the V-19 groaned, fighting its imbalance. The starboard side dipped momentarily, threatening to scrape the hangar floor. Jackson gasped, reaching for the emergency power cutoff. "Don't touch it, Lieutenant!" Cora snapped, her eyes glued to the internal horizon. With a superhuman delicacy, she simultaneously increased power to the main rotors and adjusted the stick to compensate for the thruster's uneven lift. It was like juggling a massive, delicate bowling ball, a maneuver that required instinct, not just training. The aircraft shimmied, then, agonizingly slowly, lifted off the ground. Cora nursed the V-19 out of the hangar and into the pre-dawn sky, climbing steeply but carefully. The mission was a simple, high-speed lift and transport to a forward operating area 80 miles away, a distance that, under normal circumstances, would be routine. Today, it was a gauntlet. As she flew, the physical and emotional weight of her past decision pressed down on her. 2 years ago, Major Keller, her commanding officer at the time, had botched a key maintenance log, nearly causing a catastrophic failure on a similar, though less advanced, aircraft. When the subsequent investigation threatened to expose the Major's incompetence and, worse, jeopardize the funding and existence of the entire air unit, Keller had come to Cora. He promised her a quick, quiet reinstatement and a transfer, back to the field if she signed a statement, taking the blame for the negligence. It was a choice between her career and saving the jobs and mission capacity of 20 other people. She chose the latter. She chose sacrifice. Now, as she landed the V-19 perfectly on the forward pad, saving Thorne's critical operation, she felt a profound, bittersweet sense of purpose. She proved her strength not just in the air, but in her silence. Back at Fort Claiborne just before sunrise, the SEAL team was ecstatic. Thorne was relieved and impressed. He pulled her aside as she disembarked. "Staff Sergeant," he said, his voice quieter now, filled with genuine admiration. "That was the finest piece of flying and mechanical genius I have ever witnessed." "You saved us. I owe you," Cora simply replied. "My pleasure, Captain. Just doing my job." But the military machinery of bureaucracy, the very system she had sacrificed for, was already moving to dismiss her achievement. As she walked toward the hangar door, a familiar figure stepped out of the shadows. Major Stephen Keller. He had been assigned to Fort Claiborne as a temporary base commander. The man who had ruined her life was now her superior. He smiled, but his eyes were cold and calculating. "Captain Thorne," Keller said smoothly, extending a hand to the SEAL commander. "Welcome to Claiborne. I understand you had a maintenance issue with the V-19. Rest assured, my staff quickly resolved it. Staff Sergeant Ramirez here simply acted as a competent second set of hands under Lieutenant Jackson's command." He threw a dismissive glance at Cora. "Ramirez, you're off the clock. Go get some rest. And prepare the updated supply logs for my desk by 800 hours. Thorne frowned, his gaze flicking between Keller's official confidence and Cora's quiet resignation. The mission was successful, and Keller was the base commander. Thorne's official channels would only see what Keller submitted. A smooth resolution thanks to the command structure, with Cora merely a footnote. The betrayal was complete. Cora had saved the mission, but she was going back to 22B, and her sacrifice had been used against her again. The cold shock of betrayal hit Cora harder than the engine's vibration. Thorne, a man of integrity, was clearly conflicted, but he was also a busy commander following the chain of command. Keller's smooth, confident lie had overridden the truth. The official reports would show Major Keller's efficient leadership, Lieutenant Jackson's technical supervision, and Staff Sergeant Ramirez as an obedient assistant. Cora was back in 22B by 0700, surrounded by dusty files and the ghost of her former career. She was angry, but it was a quiet, surgical anger. She had allowed the first injustice to protect her unit. She would not allow this second one to stand. Not after proving her worth in front of the very system that had condemned her. She knew Keller's tactics. He was a master of bureaucratic cover-up. He hadn't just gotten her sidelined. He was ensuring she stayed sidelined. Her presence at Fort Claiborne, especially her display of skill, was a threat to his carefully constructed narrative of competence. Her new focus wasn't flying. It was justice, and justice, she knew, lay in the data. She started her own investigation, using her admin access, the very thing Keller thought would keep her harmlessly occupied. She didn't look for the obvious signed documents from 2 years ago, which were undoubtedly destroyed or doctored. She looked for the electronic ghosts, the tiny, overlooked bits of data that survive even the most diligent cleanup. Her theory was simple. Keller had blamed her for a maintenance log entry on a specific date. He would have erased or overwritten the main electronic record, but he was lazy. He wouldn't have checked the low-level archival systems that backed up every file accessed by the maintenance network for auditing purposes, even the ones later deleted. For 3 days, Cora worked her administrative desk with the focus of a combat surgeon. She processed manifests, ordered paperclips, and quietly, meticulously, she ran complex, non-standard queries on the base's aging server system. She didn't look for Ramirez or negligence. She looked for Major Keller's access history and file deletion events. She finally found a promising thread in the base's tertiary, unclassified server archive, a system only meant to track energy consumption and digital footprints. She located a massive spike in data access and deletion coming from Major Keller's terminal, dated exactly 1 day after the incident 2 years prior. Following the digital breadcrumbs, she found an anomaly. A small, encrypted file package labeled simply Backup A47 Log, stored on a long-forgotten server drive in the deepest subfolder of the payroll department's archive, a place no one, especially not a logistics major, would ever think to look. Keller had likely dumped it there accidentally during a massive delete operation, thinking it was a fragment of the system backup. Cora recognized the file name. A47 was the unique identifier for the internal communication system used by her former air unit. It wasn't a maintenance log. It was a fragment of an internal voice communications recording, encrypted to military specifications. She spent the next 2 days bypassing the encryption. It was tedious work, requiring all her technical skill to avoid triggering an audit alert. She used an old, decommissioned terminal and wrote a simple Python script to run an asynchronous brute force decryption. On the 5th day, the script cracked the code. The file wasn't long, but it was devastating. It was a secure voice channel recording between Major Keller and a subordinate, captured immediately after the investigation into the initial maintenance issue began. Keller's voice, smug and anxious, played back in Cora's dusty office, volume barely above a whisper. The paper trail shows I signed off on the A check, not Lieutenant Miller. Find Ramirez. She's the staff sergeant, she's expendable. Tell her if she signs a statement taking the fall for the log error, the unit gets cleared and she gets an honorable transfer in a few months. Otherwise, I expose the whole budget shortage and we all sink. We need her to take the blame. It's the only way to protect my command and save the unit. Cora listened to it 3 times. The blood rushed from her face, leaving her cold despite the heat. It wasn't just the log error. It was the coercion. It was the proof of the lie she had lived under. It was the exposure of her sacrifice as nothing but a tool for a cowardly officer's advancement. The injustice was no longer a dull ache. It was a weapon. She had the truth. Now she needed the right time and the right audience to expose it. She needed Captain Thorne, who still believed the chain of command was clean, to see the rot beneath. The base was abuzz. Captain Thorne and his SEAL team were preparing for a high-profile, formal debriefing and change of command ceremony, where Major Keller would officially be recognized for his efficient command during the V-19 incident and transfer to a more prestigious post. It was Keller's final triumphant elevation, built entirely on Cora's ruin. Cora knew the recording was critical, but a simple file transfer could be dismissed as a deep fake or fabricated evidence. She needed to present it with undeniable authority, linking it to the present, and using her technical knowledge as proof of authenticity. She found Captain Thorne overseeing the final pre-flight checks on the V-19, which was now fully repaired with official replacement parts. He looked tired but ready to leave Fort Claiborne behind. "Captain Thorne?" Cora called out, approaching him. Thorne paused, looking conflicted again. "Staff Sergeant. Look, I filed the paperwork recommending a commendation for your quick action, but Major Keller's report—" "I know, Captain," Cora interrupted gently. "It's about the V-19, not my commendation." "Not the past." "The future." She pointed at the sleek helicopter. "The actuator failed because of high-frequency magnetic interference, correct?" "That's the technical analysis," Thorne confirmed, frowning. "That interference is caused by degraded internal shielding," Cora continued, her voice gaining quiet intensity. "And that degradation starts when the V-19 is repeatedly stored next to high-amperage power transformers, like the ones in the old hangar where we found it. You've had repeated subtle maintenance failures since you took command, haven't you, Captain?" Thorne's eyes narrowed. "How do you know that?" "Because," Cora said, taking a breath, "the only reason the V-19 was stored there in the first place was due to the emergency hangar maintenance protocol issued 2 years ago. That protocol rerouted all advanced aircraft to unshielded storage." She paused. "That protocol was put in place after Major Keller, then a lieutenant, signed off on faulty maintenance documentation, nearly crashing a transport, and was then put in charge of fixing the hangar space he compromised. She was laying out the technical dominoes. Keller's past negligence caused the storage issue, which caused the V-19's failure, which brought her back into his orbit. Thorne was a smart man. He saw the pattern, but he needed proof. Staff Sergeant, if you have something to say about Major Keller, you need hard proof, not conspiracy." "I have it," Cora said. "Not a file." "A log." She held up a small, ruggedized military tablet. I was able to retrieve an encrypted comms log from my old unit's archives. I've set up a secure channel to play it, but I need you to listen to it publicly. I need the truth exposed, not just filed away." Thorne looked at the tablet, then at Cora's brave, determined eyes. He saw the genuine soldier who had just risked her life. He saw the integrity Major Keller lacked. "The debriefing is in 5 minutes." In the auditorium. "Let's go." The auditorium was packed. Major Keller was at the podium, smiling broadly as a high-ranking general began to read the commendation for his outstanding efficiency and proactive command. Just as the general concluded, Thorne walked in, commanding attention. He stopped next to Cora, who was standing by the technician's console. "General, sir," Thorne said, his voice ringing across the room. "Before Major Keller accepts his commendation, I believe we need to address the systemic issues that led to the V-19 crisis." "It's about accountability, sir." Keller's smile vanished. "Captain, this is a formal ceremony, not a maintenance review." "It's about maintenance, Major," Thorne replied, his eyes locked on Cora. "Staff Sergeant Ramirez, you have the floor." Cora stepped up to the console. She didn't speak to the room. She spoke to the machine. She routed her tablet's output into the auditorium's main audio system, ensuring the recording signal was digitally stamped and untraceable. A scratchy static filled the room, followed by the undeniable sound of Major Keller's younger voice, laced with arrogance and fear, detailing his betrayal. "The paper trail shows I signed off on the A-check. Find Ramirez. She's the staff sergeant, she's expendable. Tell her if she signs a statement taking the fall for the log error, the unit gets cleared, and she gets an honorable transfer. It's the only way to protect my command and save the unit." The recording played for 30 seconds. The silence that followed was absolute, a heavy, devastating judgment. Major Keller stood frozen at the podium, his face ashen, his career burning down around him. The general, an old-school officer who valued honor above all, slowly walked over to Keller. "Major," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "you will consider yourself under immediate investigation for dereliction of duty and coercion." He then turned to Cora. He didn't ask her for details. The evidence was enough. He looked at her tattered staff sergeant stripes and the dignity in her posture. "Staff Sergeant Ramirez," the general announced to the stunned audience. "Effective immediately by order of the command, you are HON."